My phone vibrated 3 times on the office desk. I stared at the message on the screen, and my back instantly went rigid. Within 3 minutes. Come to my office. Now. Sender. Victoria Frost. No one in the entire group dared to keep Ms. Frost waiting. I threw down the documents in my hand and rushed toward the elevator. My colleagues looked at me with sympathy. Marcus, the marketing director, muttered under his breath. Liam, what kind of trouble did you get yourself into this time? I shook my head. Honestly, I had no idea either. The moment the elevator doors closed, I quickly reviewed everything I had done over the past 3 days. The data analysis for the acquisition case had been submitted. The competitor research report had passed review. There had been no mistakes. So why was she looking for me? The elevator reached the 32nd floor quickly. At the end of the corridor, the dark brown solid wood door was tightly shut. I took a deep breath and raised my hand, knocking 3 times. A cold voice came from inside. Come in. I pushed the door open and walked in. Before I could even speak, Victoria Frost stood up from behind her desk and walked straight toward me. Today, she was wearing a dark emerald satin suit. Her long hair was tied into a low ponytail, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Her expression was as cold as usual. Impossible to read. I was just about to report my work when she raised her hand, signaling me to stay silent. Then she walked to the door and closed it. The lock clicked into place. My heart skipped half a beat. Victoria turned around to face me. There was less than half a step between us. I could smell the faint, cool fragrance on her body. She stared into my eyes for 3 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, she reached out, wrapped her hand around the back of my neck, and pulled me forcefully toward her. The next second, her lips pressed against mine. My whole body felt as if it had been struck by lightning. My mind went completely blank. Victoria Frost's kiss carried a force that allowed no resistance. Her other hand wrapped around my waist, pressing me against the door. My back hit the solid wooden panel with a dull thud. I felt as though my heart was about to leap out of my throat. Only one thought kept echoing in my mind over and over. Victoria Frost is kissing me. Victoria Frost is kissing me. The most untouchable woman in the entire group was kissing me. By reflex, I tried to push her away, but her hand gripped the back of my neck tightly, giving me no room to retreat. I had no idea how long it lasted. Finally, she let go. I gasped for air, my ears so hot they could have fried an egg. Victoria took one step back and raised an eyebrow. The corners of her lips lifted slightly, forming a smile that was not quite a smile. Then she spoke, her voice low, lazy, and dangerous. Come back to my place with me tonight. I was completely stunned. My mouth opened, but not a single word came out. Victoria turned and walked back to her desk, picking up the car keys lying on it. She glanced back at me, amusement flickering in her eyes. What? You don't want to? I finally found my voice. Ms. Frost. After work. Don't call me Ms. Frost. She cut me off, her tone leaving no room for argument. Call me Victoria. I stood frozen in place, my palms covered in sweat. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Victoria Frost was the CEO of the group. Her net worth was in the billions. The wealthy heirs pursuing her could probably line up from one end of the city to the other. And me? I was just a junior marketing supervisor who had joined the company 2 years ago. What was I to her? Why would she suddenly treat me like this? Victoria seemed to notice my hesitation. She walked up to me, raised her hand, and lightly traced my chin with her fingertip. Liam Reed, let me ask you something. I stiffened, my throat tightening. Are you afraid of me? Of course I was afraid of her. There wasn't a single person in the company who wasn't. In the 2 years since I joined the company, I had personally witnessed her lose her temper in meetings 3 times. Those scenes still made my scalp tingle whenever I thought about them. But the way she looked at me now was completely different from the woman in the conference room. In those eyes, there was scrutiny, there was testing, and there was something else, something I couldn't understand. Victoria waited for 3 seconds, but I gave no answer. She let out a soft laugh. Silence means yes. Since you're afraid of me, then behave. She tossed the car keys in her hand to me. I caught them instinctively. The cold metal against my palm brought me back to my senses a little. Ms. Frost. I can't. I said. Call me Victoria. Her tone suddenly turned cold. Her eyes sharpened along with it. That familiar pressure returned. The hair on my back stood on end. Victoria stared at me for 2 seconds. Then suddenly smiled again. She looked beautiful when she smiled. But I always felt there was something hidden beneath that smile. Liam. 3 months ago. On the day you completed your 2nd year at the company. In the pantry. You said something to your colleagues. She paused. Then repeated it word by word. You said, "A woman like Victoria Frost deserves to have no man dare marry her for the rest of her life." My brain exploded into a field of white light. 3 months ago. The pantry. I remembered. That day. Several colleagues were chatting in the pantry. And somehow the topic had shifted to Victoria Frost. Someone said she was too domineering. Someone else said her standards were too high. And I, unable to keep my mouth shut, had added that sentence. But how could she have known about a conversation in the pantry? Victoria watched my pale face. And the smile at the corner of her mouth deepened. What? Remember now? Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Ms. Frost. That was just a casual joke. A joke? She stepped closer. Her body was almost pressed against mine. She tilted her head slightly and looked up at me. A dangerous glint in her eyes. Then tell me. Do you like today's joke? I was completely speechless. Victoria reached out and patted my face. The force was not heavy, but it carried a full sense of control. Come home with me tonight. That is an order. She turned, picked up the coat from the sofa, and walked toward the door in her high heels. When she passed by me, she paused for 1 second. What are you standing there for? Move. I clenched the car keys in my hand. My nails dug into my palm. The pain barely helped me calm down. I took a deep breath and followed her. No matter what she wanted to do, there was probably no turning back tonight. There were only the two of us in the elevator. Victoria stood half a step in front of me, her back facing me. I looked at her figure and couldn't help asking, "May I ask what exactly you're trying to do?" She did not turn around. Her voice was indifferent. You'll know when we get there. The elevator went straight down to the underground parking garage. Her car was a black coupe, sleek and understated. I opened the driver's door and got in. Victoria sat in the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt. Rivergate Estates. The address is in the navigation. I started the car and drove out of the underground garage. The evening rush hour traffic was dense. Inside the car, it was so quiet that only the sound of the air conditioning remained. I waited for a long time before finally asking again. Are you looking for me because of the acquisition case? Victoria turned her head and glanced at me. Do you think I would kiss you because of an acquisition case? Her answer was too direct. My face started burning again. She withdrew her gaze and looked at the traffic ahead. Liam, have you ever thought about something? What? In the 2 years since you joined the company, you've been promoted 3 times. I froze. She was right. I had gone from an ordinary employee to team leader, then to supervisor. The speed was indeed absurdly fast. I had always thought I was just lucky, but now that Victoria had brought it up, clearly, she wasn't trying to praise me. You mean, do you really think you reached your current position by relying only on yourself? Her tone was casual, but my heart tightened. My fingers slowly clenched around the steering wheel. I don't understand. Victoria did not answer. She simply closed her eyes, leaning back against the seat. She looked tired. Or perhaps she was waiting for me to figure it out myself. The car fell silent again. As I drove, my thoughts churned violently. Rivergate Estates arrived quickly. The security guard saw the license plate from afar and immediately lifted the barrier. I parked the car in the garage of a detached villa. Victoria opened her eyes and pointed at the door leading inside. Go in. I followed her through the entryway and into the living room. The villa's interior was just like her. Simple, cold, and hard, with no unnecessary decorations. Victoria took off her coat and casually draped it over the sofa. She took a bottle of red wine from the cabinet and poured 2 glasses. Then she handed one of them to me. Drink a little. Relax. I accepted the glass. But I did not drink. Victoria sat down on the sofa with her wineglass and crossed one leg over the other. She looked at me with a hint of scrutiny in her eyes. Liam, I brought you here today because I want to tell you something. She paused. Her voice suddenly became very soft. You were chosen by me. My hand froze in midair while holding the wine glass. What do you mean? Victoria gently swirled the red wine in her glass. Her gaze passed through the glass wall and landed on me. From the very beginning, I chose you. I felt my heartbeat begin to speed up again. Not from excitement, but from a faint, growing unease. Victoria took a sip of wine and continued. On the day of your job interview, I was watching from the room next door. Your resume was not impressive. A second-tier university. No experience in a major corporation. But I still told human resources to hire you. She set down the glass. Her fingertips tapped lightly on her knee. Do you know why? I shook my head. Victoria suddenly smiled. There was a meaning in that smile that I could not understand. Because you look like someone. Someone I hate very, very much. The air in the living room seemed to freeze instantly. I stood rigid where I was. The wine glass in my hand nearly slipped. Victoria stood up and walked over to me. She reached out and pinched my chin, forcing me to lift my head, forcing me to look straight into her eyes. Are you going to ask me why I kissed you if I hate you? I opened my mouth. It felt as if my throat had been stuffed with cotton. Victoria released me and stepped back 2 paces. Then she returned to the sofa and sat down again. She lifted her wine glass, her expression returning to its former coldness. Because I want you. You. As a person. In taking you. I stood there, feeling as if I had been swept into a sudden storm. And at the center of that storm were Victoria Frost's bottomless eyes. She watched me, waiting for my answer. Outside the window, the night had fully fallen. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. Then I heard myself say one sentence. Ms. Frost, what exactly do you want me to do? Victoria swirled the wine glass. The corner of her mouth curved upward. That curve was cold, like a gleam of light flashing along the edge of a blade. She put down the glass and slowly said one sentence. I want you to help me destroy someone. The living room was so quiet that only the ticking of the wall clock remained. I stared at Victoria Frost's face, trying to find even the slightest trace that she was joking. There was none. Her eyes were like ice-hardened steel, so cold they sent a chill down my spine. I set down the wine glass in my hand. The base of the glass touched the coffee table with a crisp sound. Destroy who? Victoria rose from the sofa and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside was the night view of Rivergate Estates. The lights were brilliant, quiet, and luxurious. With her back to me, her voice carried no emotion at all. My father. I froze. Victoria Frost's father. Richard Frost, the founder of Frost Group. 3 years ago, Richard Frost had announced his retirement from the front line and handed the entire group over to his daughter. The outside world called it a legendary succession in the business world. A great father raising an extraordinary daughter. But at this moment, Victoria's tone clearly carried naked hatred. You want me to destroy your father? I repeated the words, my voice filled with disbelief. Victoria turned around and leaned against the glass window. The lights outside outlined her figure in a cold white halo. She folded her arms and nodded at me. Yes. Why? She did not answer. Instead, she walked to the coffee table, picked up her phone, tapped on it a few times, and then turned the screen toward me. On the screen was a photograph. In the photo was a young man wearing a white shirt, standing on a university campus with a bright smile. That face really did look like mine. The brows, the outline, even the upward curve of his lips when he smiled. I stared at the screen for a long time before raising my head. Who is he? Victoria put away her phone and sat back down on the sofa. Her fingers tapped lightly on her knee. One beat after another. Slow and steady. His name was Ethan Blake. He was my boyfriend in college. When she said the word boyfriend, there was the faintest ripple in her voice, like a tiny stone dropped into a still lake. But soon, everything returned to calm. 6 years ago, my father discovered my relationship with him. He thought Ethan Blake was not worthy of the Frost family, not worthy of me. Victoria lifted her wine glass and took a large sip. She put it down again, her fingers tightening until her knuckles turned faintly pale. My father used every method he could think of to force him to leave me. Ethan studied design. He had just graduated and was interning at a design company. My father pressured that company and made him lose his job. He tried to find another job, but the entire industry had already received the message. No one dared to hire him. She paused there. I looked at her and waited for her to continue. Victoria lifted her eyes and looked straight at me. Later. He killed himself. Those 4 words were spoken very softly, but every single word was like a hammer striking the air in the living room. For one moment, I felt as if my breathing had stopped. He left you a letter. He said he didn't blame you. He said he was just too tired. But that letter was intercepted by my father. I didn't find out he was dead until half a year later. When Victoria said all this, there was no expression on her face. It was as though she were reading a document that had nothing to do with her. But her fingers were trembling slightly. I could see it. She had pressed every emotion beneath that icy shell. The living room stayed silent for a very long time. The hands of the wall clock moved from one mark to the next. The sound was especially clear. Finally, I spoke. So you hired me because I look like him? Victoria nodded. At first, yes. And later? She looked at me. There was something in her eyes that was hard to describe. Later, I realized you were different from him. Ethan Blake was gentle. He was kind to everyone. But deep down, he was too soft. When things happened, he only knew how to retreat. He only knew how to endure. But you are not like that. She stood up and walked over to me. Then she looked up at me slightly. In the 2 years since you joined the company, you did 3 things that made me start paying attention to you. First, 3 months after joining the company, you dared to contradict your direct superior in a departmental meeting. Second, during last year's acquisition case, you stayed up all night alone and prepared 3 complete proposals, securing the core data. Third, last month, when someone spread rumors about you behind your back, you didn't explain yourself. You simply used your performance to shut everyone up. Victoria raised her hand. Her index finger pressed against my chest. Through the shirt, I could feel the temperature of her fingertip. It was a little cold. Liam Reed, there is a ruthless streak in your bones. Just like me. I lowered my head and looked at her. My heart was beating terribly fast. Not because of ambiguity, but because she was right. She had pointed out the deepest part of me. The part even I was unwilling to admit. Victoria withdrew her hand and took 1 step back. So I need you. I need you to help me make my father pay the price. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. When you say destroy him, what exactly do you mean? Victoria turned around and took a file from the cabinet. Then she handed it to me. I opened the file. Inside were dense records of all kinds of information. Bank transactions, share transfer records, private account details, and photocopies of several contracts. The more I read, the more shocked I became. My fingers turned the pages slower and slower. If these things were exposed, they would be enough to ruin Richard Frost completely. You prepared all this a long time ago. I raised my head and looked at Victoria. She stood beside the window, her expression as calm as a stagnant pool. I prepared it for 6 years. Every piece of evidence, every account. I investigated them all myself. What I was waiting for was only the right person. And the right timing. She shifted her gaze from the window and let it fall on me. Now, the person is here. And the timing has arrived. I closed the file and placed it back on the coffee table. Why me? You have so much evidence in your hands. You could find any lawyer or media outlet and ruin him. Why does it have to be me? Victoria was silent for a few seconds. Then she walked up to me and did the second thing that night that completely caught me off guard. She reached out, wrapped her arms around my waist, and buried her face against my chest. My entire body stiffened as if I had been frozen in place. Her voice came from against my chest, muffled, with an almost imperceptible tremor. Because I have been holding on alone for too long. I need someone to stand beside me, even if it is only temporary, even if it is only fake. I felt as if something had seized my heart hard. That feeling was not sympathy, nor was it pity. It was something deeper, like an invisible thread pulling me toward her. I stood there, both hands hanging at my sides, not knowing where to put them. After a long while, I raised my hand and gently patted her back. Victoria's body stiffened for a moment. Then she held me even tighter. That night, I stayed at Victoria Frost's villa. Not because she demanded that I stay, but because we still had too many things to discuss. She told me everything about her father's business operations over the years from beginning to end. To put it plainly, Richard Frost's rise to fortune was a history of plunder disguised as business. In his early years, He started by acquiring state-owned assets at extremely low prices. Later, he transformed into real estate and used all kinds of methods to drive away his competitors. Victoria's mother, Evelyn Frost, had been nothing more than a tool for a business marriage. In the third year after their marriage, Richard discovered that his wife had had an affair, so he confined her at home. When Victoria was 10 years old, her mother jumped from the second floor of the villa. She did not die, but she broke her spine. For the rest of her life, she could only sit in a wheelchair. Richard Frost sent her to a sanatorium and claimed to the outside world that she had gone abroad to recuperate. Victoria went to visit her once, but the security guards stopped her outside the door. From then on, she never saw her mother again. I sat on the sofa, listening to all of this, my fingers unconsciously clenching. When Victoria spoke about these things, her tone remained calm the entire time. But I knew how much weight was buried beneath that calmness, because she spoke too fluently, as if she had rehearsed it in her mind countless times. "You've never told anyone these things?" I asked her. Victoria shook her head. "No one would believe me." To the outside world, Richard Frost is a philanthropist, a model entrepreneur. The money he donates every year is more than an ordinary company's annual profit. Who would believe these things about him? She paused and looked at me. "Do you believe me?" I nodded, without the slightest hesitation. Victoria froze for a moment. A trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. She quickly concealed it, but I remembered her expression in that instant very clearly. It was like someone who had grown used to the dark suddenly being touched by light. Uncomfortable, yet longing for it. She stood up and took away the empty wineglass in front of me. "It's late. The guest room is the first room on the left upstairs." I stood up and walked toward the stairs. Halfway up, I stopped. Then I turned around and looked down at her from above. "Victoria Frost." She raised her head. "You want me to help you? Fine. But I have one condition." Victoria narrowed her eyes slightly. She seemed surprised by my tone. "Speak. I want to know the whole truth. I can tell from the evidence you gave me that some of it was obtained legally, but some of it probably came from sources that are not exactly clean. I want to know how you got these things." Victoria's eyes changed. She stared at me, as if re-evaluating who I was. After a long time, she gave a soft laugh. That smile was very brief. So brief it was almost impossible to catch. "You really are smart." She walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. One of us stood above, the other below. We were separated by 3 steps. "Liam Reed." You guessed right. For some things, I used methods that cannot be exposed to the light. Are you trying to ask me whether, if everything is exposed one day, I will drag you down with me? I said nothing. That counted as my answer. Victoria stepped up 2 stairs, moving closer to me. "Then let me tell you. From the moment you stepped into this villa, you were already on the boat. You can no longer get off." After saying that, she turned and walked toward her own room. When she reached the door, she looked back at me again. Only one floor lamp was on in the living room. The dim yellow light stretched her shadow very long. Her expression was drowned in the darkness. Impossible to see clearly. I only heard her voice, carrying a complexity I could not explain. "Good night, Liam." She pushed open the door and entered the room. The door closed behind her. I stood on the stairs for a long time without moving. In my mind, her last words kept echoing again and again. "You were already on the boat. You can no longer get off." I entered the guest room, laid down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. There was a crystal chandelier above me. In the darkness, it gave off a faint, dim glow. I closed my eyes, but my mind only became clearer. The things Victoria Frost had said, the evidence, the plan, all the information rapidly reorganized itself in my mind, piecing together a vague outline. Then my eyes suddenly opened. No, something was wrong. Ethan Blake had killed himself 6 years ago. Victoria said she only found out half a year later. But Richard Frost had suppressed Ethan, forced him to lose his job, and blocked the entire industry from hiring him. All of that happened 6 years ago. Back then, Victoria had only just graduated from university. How could she possibly know the details so clearly? Who told her? And also, the evidence she had prepared. The bank transactions and private account details. That kind of information was not something an ordinary person could obtain. There had to be someone behind her. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and took out my phone. The screen lit up. The time showed 1:23 a.m. I hesitated for a few seconds. Then I typed a name into the search bar. Ethan Blake. The search results showed that 6 years ago, a young designer in this city had indeed died by suicide. The news article was short, only a few lines, but I noticed one detail. The article mentioned that the company Ethan Blake had last worked for before his death was not a design company. It was an investment company. And the controlling shareholder of that investment company was Frost Group. I stared at the screen. My fingers slowly tightened. Victoria Frost had not told me the whole truth. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I was woken by my alarm. After washing up, I went downstairs. Victoria Frost was already sitting at the dining table. She had changed into a dark gray business suit. Her hair was pinned up, and her makeup was flawless. She looked completely different from the woman I had seen last night. On the table were 2 breakfasts: fried eggs, toast, black coffee. She pointed at the seat across from her, signaling for me to sit. I pulled out the chair and sat down opposite her. I picked up a piece of toast and took a bite. Unexpectedly, it tasted good. Victoria held her coffee cup, her gaze passing over the rim as she looked at me. "How did you sleep?" "Not bad." She set down the cup, picked up her phone, tapped on it a few times, and pushed it to the center of the table. On the screen was a document. The title read, Equity Holding Agreement. I picked up the phone and read through it from beginning to end. The agreement was simple. Victoria Frost would transfer 15% of her shares in Frost Group under my name. In exchange, I had to cooperate with her over the next 3 months to complete her plan against Richard Frost. 3 months later, the shares would automatically be transferred back to her, and I would receive a massive payment. After reading the agreement, I placed the phone back on the table. Then I looked up at Victoria. "You left something out last night." Victoria was holding her coffee cup. When she heard that, her movement paused. She set down the cup, her expression unchanged. "What?" "Ethan Blake." I deliberately said the name very slowly. "Before he died, the last place he worked was not a design company. It was an investment company controlled by Frost Group." Victoria's eyes changed. The change was very quick. So quick it was almost impossible to catch. But my eyes had been fixed on her the whole time. I did not miss a single detail. Her pupils shrank slightly. The fingers holding her coffee cup tightened. Then she slowly put the cup down, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me. "You investigated it." It was not a question. It was a statement. I nodded. "Last night, you said your father forced Ethan Blake to lose his job and blacklisted him across the entire industry. But the news said his last job was at an investment company, not a design company. Why did you lie?" Victoria remained silent for a long time. The dining room was so quiet that only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Then she suddenly gave a small laugh. There was a trace of bitterness in that smile. "I didn't lie. I just didn't finish telling you." She stood up and walked to the window, turning her back to me. Morning light shone in from outside, stretching her shadow long across the floor. Ethan was indeed forced out of the design industry. Later, I begged my father to arrange a job for him at an investment company under Frost Group, as the lowest level clerk. She turned around and looked at me. Sunlight fell across her face. Her expression was calm, but there was something shining in her eyes. It was not tears. It was something more complicated. I thought I was helping him, but I didn't know I was pushing him into hell with my own hands. Victoria sat back down at the dining table. Her hands were folded on the table. Her fingers were interlocked tightly, her knuckles slightly protruding from the force. The reason my father agreed to give him a job was not because he had softened. He wanted Ethan to live in humiliation every single day. He wanted him to work on Frost family territory as the lowest level employee. He wanted him to watch every day as people from Frost Group ordered him around like he was nothing. Her voice became softer and softer. By the end, it was almost a whisper. Ethan endured it for 3 months. Then he jumped from the window of his office, from that tiny cubicle that was barely 4 square meters. The 21st floor. I sat in the chair, feeling chills run down my back. Victoria looked at me. Her eyes were slightly red, but she did not cry. She only took a deep breath and pressed all her emotions back down. That is the whole truth. My father killed him. And I was an accomplice. After saying that, she stood up and walked toward the door without looking back. When she reached the entryway, she stopped. She did not turn around. With her back to me, she said one sentence. The agreement is on the table. Decide for yourself whether you want to sign it. I'm giving you the day off. You don't need to go to the company today. The door closed behind her. I sat at the dining table, looking at the equity holding agreement. Victoria Frost's signature was already on it. The handwriting was smooth and powerful, just like her. I picked up the pen and opened the agreement. Then, in the signature field, I wrote my own name stroke by stroke. Liam Reed. After signing, I closed the agreement and leaned back in the chair. I shut my eyes. My mind was racing. I believed 90% of Victoria Frost's story. As for the remaining 10%, it was not that I did not believe her. There were simply still things I could not figure out. What exactly was she still hiding? I opened my eyes and picked up my phone. There was an unread message in the marketing department group chat. Someone had tagged everyone. It said that at 3 o'clock that afternoon, Richard Frost would be coming to the company for an inspection. The founder of Frost Group. A man who had stayed behind the scenes for 3 years. And now, all of a sudden, he was coming to the company. I stared at the message. My heartbeat suddenly quickened. This was not a coincidence. It absolutely was not. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and put the plates in the sink. Then I picked up my coat, went out, got into a taxi, and headed straight for the company. By the time I arrived, it was exactly 10 in the morning. Everyone was so busy their feet barely touched the ground. They were all preparing for Richard Frost's visit that afternoon. Welcome flower baskets had been placed in the lobby. New carpets had been laid in the corridors. I walked into the marketing department. Marcus was directing people as they set up the conference room. When he saw me, he froze. Liam, weren't you on leave? Cancelled it at the last minute. I went to my desk and turned on my computer. An email popped up on the screen. The sender was an unfamiliar email address. I opened it. There was only one sentence inside. You signed it. Smart. I stared at those 4 words, and a chill ran down my spine. How did the sender know I had signed the agreement? I immediately replied, asking who they were. Less than a minute later, a reply came. You do not need to know who I am. You only need to know that in Victoria Frost's plan, you are nothing more than a pawn. Her goal is not revenge. What she truly wants is something you cannot even imagine. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind rapidly replayed everything that had happened last night and this morning. Victoria's words, her expressions, her tears. Were they real or fake? I replied to the email. What exactly are you trying to say? A few seconds later, a new email appeared. This time, it was not text. It was an address. East City Nursing Home. 3rd floor. Room 317. Below the address was one sentence. Go see her mother. Then you will understand everything. I stared at the address on the screen. My heartbeat grew faster and faster. Victoria Frost's mother. The woman who had been confined in a nursing home. Someone I had never imagined I would have contact with. The person behind this email. Were they trying to help me? Or harm me? I hesitated for a long time. In the end, I closed the computer and stood up. Marcus stuck his head out from the conference room and called out to me. Liam, Mr. Frost is coming this afternoon. You have to be here. Don't run off. I gave him an okay gesture. Then I picked up my coat and left the office. I was going to that nursing home. No matter who sent that email. No matter whether they were an enemy or an ally. There was one thing they were right about. I had to know the whole truth. When I arrived at the nursing home by taxi, it was exactly 11 at noon. It was a high-end care facility. The gate was tightly shut, with security guards on duty at the entrance. I walked to the guard room. I gave a fake name and said I had come to visit an elder. The guard checked the records and said visitors to room 317 needed to be accompanied by family. I was still thinking of how to make up an excuse when my phone suddenly rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. A woman's voice came from the other end. She sounded older, but her tone was very gentle. Is this Mr. Liam Reed? Yes. I am Victoria Frost's mother. Evelyn Frost. I held the phone and froze where I stood. Evelyn Frost's next words made every hair on my back stand up. I am waiting for you in room 317. Come in. The guards will not stop you. The call ended. I raised my head and looked at the security guard. Sure enough, the guard nodded at me and opened the gate. I walked through the courtyard of the nursing home and entered the building. The elevator went up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was very quiet. The air carried a faint smell of disinfectant. I walked to the door of room 317. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, I saw a woman sitting in a wheelchair. She looked to be in her 50s. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her features were delicate. I could faintly see Victoria's resemblance in her face. A blanket covered her legs. It was obvious that the lower half of her body could no longer move. Evelyn Frost looked at me and smiled faintly. Her smile was gentle, but there was an indescribable sharpness in her eyes. That sharpness was exactly the same as Victoria's. Liam, you're here. She pointed at the chair beside her, signaling for me to sit. I walked over and sat opposite her. Evelyn studied me. Her gaze slowly moved from my face to my hands. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but every word was clear. You really do look a lot like Ethan Blake. Ethan Blake again. I nodded and said nothing. Evelyn leaned back against the wheelchair. Her hands were folded on the blanket over her lap. She looked out the window, her gaze distant. Did Victoria tell you that my husband drove Ethan Blake to his death? Yes. Evelyn smiled. There was a trace of mockery in that smile. She turned her head and looked at me. Then let me tell you something else. Ethan Blake did not kill himself. I froze. Evelyn's voice was very calm, as if she were speaking of the most ordinary thing in the world. He was pushed by Victoria. With her own hands. The air in the ward seemed to solidify. I stared at Evelyn Frost's face, trying to find any trace of a lie in her expression. There was none. Her eyes were calm. So calm that it sent a chill down my spine. What did you say? I heard my own voice turn dry. Evelyn did not answer. She turned her wheelchair toward the small cabinet beside the bed. From the drawer, she took out a brown paper envelope and handed it to me. The envelope was old. The corners were worn. I took it and opened it. Inside was a stack of photographs. The pictures were not very clear. They looked like screenshots from surveillance footage. The scene was a rooftop. The time was late at night. 2 people stood on the rooftop. A man and a woman. I recognized the woman's figure at once. It was Victoria Frost. She was much younger than now. She wore a hoodie and jeans, the kind common on university campuses. The man opposite her was Ethan Blake. The 2 of them were arguing fiercely. The next few photos recorded the progression of the entire scene. Victoria reached out and pushed Ethan. Ethan staggered back 2 steps and hit the railing at the edge of the rooftop. In the next photo, the railing broke. Ethan's body leaned backward. His hands clawed at the air but caught nothing. The final photo showed only Victoria left on the rooftop. She stood at the edge, looking down. I put the photos back into the envelope. My fingers were trembling slightly. Evelyn's voice came from beside me. Still calm. That night, they arranged to meet on the rooftop. Ethan suggested breaking up because he could no longer endure the pressure. He said he didn't want people pointing fingers at him anymore. He didn't want people saying he was living off a woman. Victoria refused. They started arguing. The argument grew more and more intense. Victoria pushed him. She did not mean to kill him, but she did push him. The railing on that building had been neglected for years. It broke the moment he hit it. She paused and looked out the window. Ethan Blake fell from the 21st floor. He died on the spot. I placed the envelope on the table. My voice was tight. How do you have these photos? Evelyn turned to look at me. A hint of mockery flashed in her eyes. My husband took them. He had already predicted that this day might come. So he had hidden cameras installed on the rooftop. After Ethan died, he took these photos to Victoria. He told her, "You killed someone." From that day on, Victoria became a different person. She began working desperately. She climbed upward desperately. She obeyed my husband in everything. Because she was afraid. Afraid these photos would be made public. Afraid of going to prison. I sat in the chair, feeling my head buzz. Evelyn continued. Victoria hates my husband. That much is true. But she hates herself even more. Her so-called revenge plan is not truly for Ethan Blake. It is for herself. She wants to bring down my husband. She wants to get the original copies of these photos. She wants to completely erase that past. She looked into my eyes. Her tone suddenly became very serious. Liam, you are only a tool. She chose you because you look like Ethan Blake. The equity holding agreement you signed contains a trap. Once she begins the plan, all legal responsibility will fall on you. You will go to prison in her place. I clenched my fists. My nails dug into my palms. The pain helped me remain calm. I raised my head and looked at Evelyn Frost. Why are you telling me this? Evelyn was silent for a few seconds. Then she sighed softly. Because I don't want to watch her keep making mistakes. Over the years, she has become more and more like my husband. Cold, calculating, willing to do anything. I hate my husband. But I cannot let Victoria become a second version of him. Her voice was slightly choked. But soon, she returned to calm. Liam, leave. Leave this city. Leave the Frost family. While there is still time. I stood up and walked to the door. Then I stopped. I turned around and looked at Evelyn in her wheelchair. One last question. Do you have proof of what you said? Evelyn smiled faintly. You saw the photos. As for the trap in the agreement, have a lawyer look at it and you'll understand. There is one more thing. She paused. Her voice became even softer. Victoria is not a bad person. She has just been afraid for too long. For far too many years. When I left the nursing home, a light rain had begun outside. Standing at the entrance, I took out my phone and looked at the unread message on the screen. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Richard Frost was coming to the company. I put away my phone and hailed a taxi. After getting in, I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. My mind was in chaos. Evelyn's words, those photographs, and Victoria's tears from last night. Who was lying? How exactly did Ethan Blake die? Did Victoria truly need me? Or was she truly using me? The taxi moved through the rain. Outside the window, the high-rise buildings were blurred by the rain into gray shadows. I opened my eyes and looked at the rain outside. Suddenly, I remembered something Victoria had said last night. From the moment you stepped into this villa, you were already on the boat. You can no longer get off. She was right. I could no longer get off. No matter what the truth was, I had to dig it out. I took out my phone, found a number, and dialed it. The call rang twice before connecting. A man's voice came from the other end, carrying a hint of surprise. Liam, what made you suddenly think of calling me? His name was Mason Quinn. He was my college roommate. Now, he was the youngest practicing lawyer in the city. His family had some background, and he had wide connections. More importantly, he was reliable. Mason, help me investigate something. What is it? 6 years ago, there was a falling case. The deceased was named Ethan Blake. At the time, the police ruled it as suicide. But I want to know whether anyone ever raised objections. Also, whether the surveillance footage from the scene still exists. The other end of the phone went silent for a few seconds. Mason's tone became serious. Liam, why are you looking into this? Don't ask. Just help me check. The sooner, the better. Mason did not ask further. He only said one thing. Fine. Give me 3 days. After hanging up, I leaned back against the seat and took a deep breath. The taxi stopped downstairs at the company. I paid, pushed open the door, and stepped into the rain. The rain hit my face. It was a little cold, but it also cleared my head. When I walked into the lobby, the place had been completely transformed. Welcome flower baskets, a red carpet, a banner hanging on the wall. Everyone in the marketing department was running around busily. Marcus was directing people to adjust the seating arrangement. When he saw me, he strode over and patted my shoulder. Liam, you're finally back. Mr. Frost will be here soon. Hurry up and change into your suit. And fix your tie. I nodded and walked toward the elevator. When the elevator doors opened, someone was standing inside. Victoria Frost. She wore a black suit. Her hair was pinned up. Her makeup was flawless. When she saw me, surprise flashed through her eyes. But very quickly, it was covered by her usual coldness. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed behind me. The two of us stood in the narrow space. Neither of us spoke. The elevator slowly rose. The floor numbers changed one by one. Victoria suddenly spoke. "Weren't you on leave?" I changed my mind. She turned her head and glanced at me. There was a hint of scrutiny in her gaze. "You signed the agreement." "I did." The corners of her mouth lifted slightly. A faint smile appeared. "Good." The elevator reached the 32nd floor. The doors opened. Victoria walked out first. I followed behind her. A row of people stood in the hallway. They were all senior executives of the group. When they saw Victoria, everyone straightened at once. She swept her eyes over them. Her voice was as cold as ice water. "Is everything ready?" Everyone nodded. Victoria turned and glanced at me. "Liam, come with me." She pushed open the door to her office and walked inside. I followed her in and closed the door. Victoria walked to her desk, picked up a document, and handed it to me. "This is the agreement my father plans to sign this afternoon. He intends to transfer several overseas assets under my name." I took the document and flipped it open. It was an asset transfer agreement. The amount involved was several $100 million. Victoria stood in front of me and looked into my eyes. "Liam, everything begins this afternoon. Are you ready?" I looked at her. Her eyes were focused, serious. But in my mind, Evelyn Frost's words kept echoing. "She chose you because you look like Ethan Blake. You will go to prison in her place." I took a deep breath, closed the document, and handed it back to her. "Ms. Frost, I have a question for you." Victoria narrowed her eyes slightly. "Ask." "The night Ethan Blake died, where were you?" Victoria's expression changed. It was not anger. It was not panic. It was something much more complicated. Like a scabbed wound suddenly being torn open, revealing raw flesh underneath that had not yet healed. Her lips moved, but she said nothing. The air in the office became heavy, oppressive. Just then, noise came from outside. Someone shouted, "Mr. Frost has arrived." Victoria quickly composed herself and turned toward the door. When she passed by me, she paused for 1 second. Then she lowered her voice and said one sentence. "You investigated it." Again. Those words. Just like this morning in the dining room. She did not wait for my answer. She opened the door and walked out. I stood in the office, watching her figure disappear at the end of the corridor. My fists slowly clenched. No matter what the truth was, this scene had to continue this afternoon. I straightened my tie and walked out of the office. In the corridor, a group of people was surrounding an elderly man with white hair but a vigorous spirit. Richard Frost. He wore a dark gray traditional suit and held an ebony cane. His steps were steady. There was a kind smile on his face. He looked like an ordinary, gentle, retired old man. But I knew what was hidden beneath that smile. Victoria walked forward and bowed slightly. "Father." Richard smiled and patted her shoulder. His gaze passed over his daughter and landed on me. In that instant, a sharp glint flashed in his eyes, like a blade cutting across water. So fast it was almost impossible to catch. Then he smiled, warm and kind. "You must be Liam Reed. Victoria has mentioned you to me. She said you are very capable." He extended his hand. I shook it. His hand was dry and strong, not like the hand of a man in his 60s. Richard held my hand and leaned closer. Then, in a volume only I could hear, he said one sentence. "I know who you are, and I know why she brought you here." He released my hand. The kind smile remained on his face. Then he turned and entered the conference room, surrounded by the crowd. I stood where I was. My back was covered in cold sweat. Meeting room packed with people. Richard Frost sat at the head of the table, hands folded over his ebony cane. A benign smile played on his lips as his gaze swept across every face like a searchlight. Victoria Frost sat to his right, expression frigid, giving nothing away. I sat at the far end of the long table, doing my best to fade into the background. But Richard's eyes still landed on me. He smiled, lifted a hand, and beckoned. "Liam Reed, why sit so far away? Come here. Sit beside me." Every head in the room swiveled toward me. My back went rigid with a cold prickle. But I rose and crossed to the empty seat on Richard's left. Richard leaned toward me, smile still in place. "Victoria tells me you've been promoted 3 times in 2 years since joining. Last quarter alone. You accounted for a third of the marketing department's performance. His tone was avuncular, warm as an elder praising a younger relative. But I knew none of it was praise. He was telling me he'd been watching my every move. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. You flatter me, Mr. Frost. It was a team effort. Richard chuckled and let it drop. The formal meeting began, focused on the group's future strategic planning. Victoria stood, moved to the projection screen, and launched into her report. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, her data analysis incisive. The entire room's attention fixed on her, except mine. I noticed Richard's fingers tapping slow, measured beats against his knee. His eyes rested on Victoria, that same benign smile on his face, but beneath it lurked something I couldn't name. Not admiration, not pride, assessment, scrutiny, like a hunter sizing up prey. When she finished, Victoria returned to her seat. Richard began to clap, the rest of the room following suit. He rose, walked to Victoria, and patted her shoulder. Excellent work, Victoria. Your father is proud of you. His voice was sincere. His eyes even glistened faintly. Had I not known the truth, I might have been moved. But I saw Victoria's eyes, downcast, that practiced smile on her lips, but her gaze was ice. Richard withdrew a document from his briefcase and set it on the table. One more matter today. I intend to transfer several overseas assets into Victoria's name. He pushed the papers toward her. The very same documents Victoria had shown me in her office earlier. Victoria picked up a pen, opened the folder. Then Richard spoke again. Wait. Victoria's hand froze. Richard produced another document from inside his coat, emblazoned across the cover. Equity holding agreement. My heart slammed against my ribs. Richard flipped the agreement open. Voice unhurried. Victoria, I hear you plan to transfer 15% of your shares to this young man, Liam Reed. The room erupted in murmurs. Executives exchanged stunned looks. Victoria's expression changed. She set down the pen, looked up at her father. Richard's smile remained avuncular. No need to look so tense. Father isn't here to call you to account. He turned his gaze to me. Liam, I reviewed the agreement you signed. Well drafted. But there's a tiny loophole. He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket, tapped a clause. This provision shifts all legal liability onto you. Once the plan launches, Victoria walks away clean. You take the fall for everything. He pushed the document toward me. You're being sold out. And you're still helping count the money. Silence fell so thick you could hear a pin drop. I felt every gaze in the room needle into my skin. Victoria shot to her feet, voice like ice. Father, this is my affair. You have no right to interfere. Richard turned to his daughter, his smile fading slowly. No right? Victoria, have you forgotten who put you in that seat? I did. I made you. And I can unmake you just as easily. Victoria's face went ashen. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her fists clenched white. Richard rose, walked to my side, and leaned close, voice low enough only I could hear. Liam, I can offer you a way out. Leave Victoria. Leave Frost Group. It'll give you enough to start fresh anywhere. He slipped a business card into my pocket. Think it over. Call that number. Then he straightened, smiling at the room at large. That concludes our meeting. Thank you all for your hard work. He took his cane, exited the room leaning on his assistant's arm. Attendees filed out one by one until only Victoria and I remained. She stood by the table, head bowed, shoulders trembling faintly. I thought she was crying, until I drew closer and realized she was laughing. A soft, bitter sound, laced with something indefinable. She looked up, eyes glimmering with tears but the corners of her mouth tilted upward. Liam, do you see? That's who he is. Plays the doting father before everyone. Then flays me alive. Inch by inch. Each word was a poisoned needle. I watched her, throat tight. Victoria. One question. Tell me the truth. She met my gaze. Those things you said last night at the villa. Which were true? Which were lies? Victoria fell silent for a long time. She walked to the window, staring out at the gray, rain-streaked sky. Raindrops traced rivulets down the glass, fracturing the world outside. She spoke, voice barely audible. Ethan Blake. That part was true. My father pressuring him. True. Him falling from the rooftop that night. I was there. That was true too. She turned to me. But I didn't push him. Her voice shook now. But her eyes were steady. He asked me to meet him that night. Said he wanted to get back together. I went. We talked for hours. I thought maybe things would be okay. Then he said he was too tired. Couldn't go on. I reached for him. Missed. He jumped. Right in front of me. 21st floor. Tears finally spilled. Dotting the charcoal carpet. My father took photos. Edited out the frames where I reached for him. Left only the one where my hand was outstretched. Like I shoved him. Then he told me if I didn't obey, those photos would go to the police. I was 22. I was terrified. So I obeyed. Became his puppet. She stepped closer. Gripped my forearm. Fingers digging in hard enough to blanch. Liam, do you believe me? I looked into her eyes. Fear. Despair. Fury. And a flicker of something fragile. Almost invisible. A plea. She was begging me to believe her. I opened my mouth to answer. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Message from Mason Quinn. Major breakthrough on the case you asked me to check. The night Ethan Blake fell. There was someone else on that roof besides the two of them. I stared at the screen. Fingers tightening around the phone. Victoria noticed the shift. Leaned in to see. I killed the display instinctively. She looked at me. Wariness flashing in her eyes. Who messaged you? I didn't answer. Slipped the phone back into my pocket. Victoria's expression cooled. You're investigating me. Curt laced her voice. Betrayal. I drew a deep breath and made a decision. Victoria. Listen. Your mother told me today you're a murderer. Your father implied you're a liar. Now someone says there was a third person on that roof. I want the truth. All of it. Victoria swayed. As if the strength had left her legs. She stumbled back against the wall. Face paper white. Her voice was barely a whisper. What did you say? A third person? Her expression told me she hadn't known. I looked at her. Suspicion coiling tighter. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A young woman's voice. Crisp and urgent. Liam Reed? This is Emily Blake. Ethan's sister. I need to tell you something. About my brother's death. About Victoria Frost. And about Richard Frost. My heart hammered against my ribs. Victoria heard the voice on the line. Jerked her head up. Eyes wide with terror. Not fear of exposure. Fear of losing something. She whispered. So softly I almost missed it. Please. Don't answer. But I already had. On the other end. Emily drew a shaky breath and said words that turned my blood to ice. The night my brother died. I was on that roof. I saw everything. Victoria didn't push him. But I saw who did. Every syllable drove into my ears like a nail. I glanced at Victoria involuntarily. She leaned against the wall. Arms wrapped around herself. Nails biting through her sleeves. It was the first time I'd seen that look on her face. Raw. Unguarded terror. I drew a deep breath. Hit the speakerphone button. Emily. Say that again. Who pushed him? Silence for 2 seconds. Then Emily's voice. Trembling with 6 years of suppressed grief. Richard Frost. Those 3 words sucked the air from the room. Victoria snapped her head up. Eyes wide. Lips quivering. She opened her mouth. But no sound came out. Emily rushed on. Words tumbling faster. That night. Ethan told me he was meeting Victoria. I was worried. Followed him up to the roof. Hid behind the stairwell door. Saw them talking. Ethan wanted to get back together. Victoria said yes. They hugged. I thought everything was fine. Started to leave. Then the elevator opened. Richard stepped out. Her voice broke. Tears thickening her words. Richard told Ethan to stay away from Victoria. Ethan said no. They argued. Louder. Uglier. Ethan said he'd go to the police. Expose what Richard had done. Then Richard shoved him. Ethan hit the railing. It snapped. He fell. Victoria lunged for him. Couldn't reach. Richard yanked her back. Clamped a hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream. Emily's voice dissolved into muffled sobs. I stayed hidden. Hand over my mouth. Richard dragged Victoria down the stairwell. Passed right by me. I nearly got caught. After they left. I ran downstairs. Ethan was already gone. I gripped the phone. Knuckles white. Victoria slid down the wall, curling on the floor, face buried in her knees. Emily drew a ragged breath, voice hoarse. The next day, Richard's men found me, gave me money, told me to study abroad, never come back, said if I talked, he'd make me and my parents disappear. I was 18. I was scared. I left. 6 years overseas. Nightmares every night. Until a few days ago. Someone told me Victoria was looking for a Liam Reed to take down Richard. I thought about it for a long time. I can't stay silent anymore. I crouched beside Victoria. She looked up, tear tracks streaking her cheeks. But the terror was gone, replaced by a light ID never seen before. The glow of a woman exonerated after 6 years in hell. Emily, I said, where are you now? In China. I have evidence. I had her send the address. Then ended the call. Silence settled again. Victoria rose, walked to the window, back to me. Her shoulders trembled, but her voice was steady. 6 years. I thought I killed him. Every day. Every night. If I hadn't gone up there. If I hadn't reached for him. If I hadn't been afraid. If I hadn't obeyed my father. Would he still be alive? She turned. Eyes red-rimmed but dry. 6 years in hell. He put me there. He meant Richard. I stepped closer. Victoria. Listen. This isn't the time for guilt. Emily has evidence. She's a witness. Those photos your father used to threaten you. They're fabricated. With Emily's testimony, we can overturn the case. Victoria looked at me. Hesitation flickering. If we do that, it'll be investigated too. I lied back then. Said I wasn't there. I gripped her shoulders. Firm. You were coerced. 22 years old. Fresh off losing the man you loved. Threatened by your own father with forged evidence. Any judge would account for that. Victoria shook her head. Voice small. You don't understand my father. He didn't build his empire on money alone. He has leverage over too many people. Even with Emily. He can bury this. Before I could reply, my phone rang again. Mason Quinn. I answered. His voice was sharp. Liam. Big problem. The detective who led Ethan Blake's case. Retired. Now works for a private security firm. The owner? One of Richard Frost's old subordinates. And this afternoon, someone filed for a protection order against Richard. Claimed there's a threat against him. Ice crawled down my spine. Who filed it? Victoria Frost. I whipped my head toward Victoria. She stood by the window. Face calm. But something unreadable in her eyes. Mason kept going. Liam. Watch yourself. Richard's network runs deep. Police. Courts. Prosecutors. You try to flip the case. He's already 10 steps ahead. I hung up. Walked to Victoria. Did you file a protection order against Richard? Victoria blinked. Then shook her head violently. No. I never filed anything like that. We stared at each other. Realization hitting simultaneously. Richard was fabricating evidence. Using Victoria's name to frame himself as the victim. If we moved against him. He'd cry conspiracy. Claim she was framing him. Layer upon layer. Trap within trap. The old fox had planned it all. I clenched my fists. Mind racing. Then the office door swung open. Evelyn Frost sat in a wheelchair. Pushed in by a nurse. Victoria froze. Mom? Victoria's voice was disbelief. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Eyes glistening but expression resolute. Victoria. I'm sorry. All these years. Trapped in that sanatorium. Too afraid to come out. To speak. Your father said if I disobeyed. He'd hurt you too. I was scared. I hid for 16 years. She gestured for the nurse to wheel her to the table. Then withdrew a thick envelope from her coat. Far thicker than the one she'd given me earlier. Evelyn pushed it toward me. Liam. This is what you needed. Evidence of my husband's crimes. I opened it. Stack of documents. Bank transfers. Bribery ledgers. Private letters. The top letter. In Richard's own handwriting. Addressed to the retired detective who'd handled Ethan Blake's case. Ensure the case is ruled a suicide. Fabricate the scene photos. Evelyn's voice was steady. Each word weighted. I've hidden these for 6 years. Pretended to be docile. Obedient. In that sanatorium. Had the nurses help me photocopy, bit by bit. Waited for this day. Victoria knelt before her mother. Gripping her hands. Evelyn stroked her daughter's hair. Tears finally falling. Victoria. I'm sorry. Mom is so sorry. I watched the pair. A heaviness settling in my chest. Not pity. Not tenderness. But something denser. Evelyn looked up at me. Liam. One more thing. My husband didn't come to the office today just for the asset transfer. He's had people planted here, monitoring Victoria's every move. He knew about that equity holding agreement long before today. He came to humiliate her, strip her of authority before the entire board. I nodded. I'd guessed as much. But Evelyn's next words stopped me cold. And that overseas asset transfer he brought? It's a trap. Sign it. And Victoria inherits hundreds of millions in debt. It's not a gift. It's a noose. Victoria surged to her feet, snatched the agreement, flipped through it, her face draining of color. Evelyn was right. Buried in the annex clauses. A debt transfer provision. Sign. And Victoria automatically assumed Richard's offshore liabilities. She stared at the papers, fingers tightening until the edges crumpled. She looked up at us, shock hardening into fury, then into icy resolve. He wanted to destroy me. Fine. Let's see who the real Frostair is. She walked to me, grabbed the equity holding agreement, and tore it in half before my eyes. Shreds fluttered to the floor. She looked at me, gaze like honed steel. Liam. That agreement's void. I won't let you bear any risk for me. She turned, picked up her phone, dialed. One sentence when the line connected. Emily Blake. This is Victoria Frost. We need to meet. Victoria ended the call. Turned to me. Eyes still red. But that familiar sharpness back. Liam. Come with me. I nodded. Helped wheel Evelyn toward the exit. Evelyn patted my hand. Voice soft. Take me back to the sanatorium. The staff there know better than to talk. The rest is up to you two. We saw Evelyn off. Watched the car disappear into the rain-slicked streets. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone. Victoria stood by the curb, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. Voice barely there. My mother spent 16 years in that sanatorium. 16 years pretending. Playing the good patient. Hoarding evidence for this day. She turned to me. Something complex in her eyes. Liam. Did you know? I hated my father for 6 years. But I feared him more. Feared him enough to have nightmares every night. To obey his every word without question. But Mom. She was more afraid than I was. And she endured 16 years. She drew a deep breath, tamping down emotion. Let's go. Emily Blake was staying at a budget hotel in the East District. Small room. One bed. One desk. 2 suitcases piled in the corner. Younger than I'd expected. Early 20s. Long hair. Pale in a plain white hoodie. She froze when she saw Victoria. They stood a few feet apart, staring at each other. No one spoke. Emily's eyes welled. She stepped forward, lips trembling, then bent at the waist in a deep bow. I'm sorry. She choked out. Sister Victoria. I'm sorry. I ran back then. Took the money and ran. Let my brother's death go unanswered for 6 years. Victoria didn't move. I thought she'd cry. Or rage. Or say something cutting. Instead, she simply reached out. Lifted Emily upright. She looked into Emily's eyes. Voice level. You don't owe me an apology. You were 18. You were scared. That's normal. She paused. I was scared too. And I said nothing. Emily shook her head frantically. Tears streaming. No, you don't understand. Before he died, Ethan came to me. Said Richard was pressuring him. Wanted him gone. Told me if anything happened to him, I had to go to the police. But I didn't. I didn't even dare call the cops. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees, shaking with sobs. Victoria stood over her, face impassive, but her clenched fists trembled. I crouched beside Emily. Emily, speaking up now isn't too late. Your brother's watching from above. He'd be proud of you. Emily looked up, tear-blurred eyes meeting mine. My phone buzzed. Mason. Liam. Richard's men are at the hotel. Get out now. I looked up, met Victoria's gaze. Victoria grabbed Emily's arm. Voice urgent but controlled. Grab what you need. Now. Emily blinked. Then fumbled under her pillow. Withdrawing a USB drive. She clutched it. Voice shaking. This. Ethan mailed it to me before he died. Evidence of Richard's money laundering. This is why they silenced him. We gathered our things. Slipped out the back entrance. We'd just turned into an alley when footsteps pounded behind us. 3 men in black suits sprinted toward us. They spotted us. Picked up speed. Victoria pulled Emily along. Me bringing up the rear. I dialed Mason. Mason. Call the police. Report illegal surveillance and harassment. Mason swore. Then said he'd handle it. We wove through the alleys. Doubling back until we lost them. The 3 of us slumped against a wall. Gasping. Victoria looked at me. Then laughed. Short. Fleeting. But it transformed her from the icy executive into someone else. Her eyes lit up. Liam. You run fast. I managed to smile. Straightened my rumpled collar. Ran track in college. Haven't forgotten. Victoria didn't reply. Turned to Emily. What's on the drive? Emily handed it over. Still trembling. When Ethan worked at Frost Investments. He uncovered Richard's money laundering. Saved the evidence. Planned to report it. But they found out first. Victoria took the drive. Fingers tightening around it until her knuckles whitened. 6 years. Ethan gave his life for this. I stepped forward. Gently took the drive. Come on. Back to my place. Mason's meeting us there. Need to back this up. Victoria and Emily followed me to my apartment. Mason was already there. Laptop and external hard drive set up. He plugged in the USB. Files populating the screen. The longer he read, the grimmer his expression. When he finished, he looked up at the 3 of us. Voice rough. This is enough to put Richard Frost away for 20 years. Silence stretched. Emily covered her mouth. Fresh tears falling. Victoria leaned against the wall. Closed her eyes. Drew a slow breath. I moved to Mason. Looked at the screen. Bank records. Transfer logs. Falsified contracts. Bribery lists. Every document pointed to Richard. Mason tapped a key. Pulling up another file. And this. The letter Ethan mailed Emily before he died. Said he planned to report Richard in 3 days. Instead, he was dead the next morning. He looked up at me. Richard moved faster. Victoria opened her eyes. Stepped to Mason. Can we submit this directly to the police? Mason hesitated. Then shook his head. We could. But with Richard's connections. He'd get wind of it before charges are filed. Destroy evidence. Counter-accuse. He's done it before. He paused. Gaze sharpening. I have a better idea. Tomorrow morning. Frost Group has a press conference. Richard's announcing a new charity fund. We release everything in front of every media outlet in the city. Even he can't suppress that. I looked at Victoria. She nodded. Emily nodded too. Wiping her cheeks. I'll do it. I'll tell everyone how my brother died. Mason closed the laptop. Tucked the drives into his bag. Set then. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Frost Group lobby. After Mason left, I settled Emily in the guest room. She was exhausted. Asleep almost instantly. Victoria sat on the living room sofa. A cup of cold tea in her hands. Night had fallen fully. City lights glittered beyond the windows. I sat across from her. Refilled her cup with hot water. Victoria accepted it. Cradling the warmth in both hands. She spoke. Voice barely audible. Liam, do you think, if I'd been braver back then, everything would be different? I didn't answer. She went on. Slower now. As if talking to herself. If I'd stood up. Accused my father. Ethan wouldn't have died in vain. Emily wouldn't have spent 6 years hiding overseas. Plagued by nightmares. Mom wouldn't have been locked in that sanatorium for 16 years. Afraid to even step into sunlight. She looked up. Eyes red but dry. All these years. I wondered what I was so afraid of. Prison? Losing everything? Being destroyed by him? But in the end, I lost it all anyway. Ethan's gone. Mom was imprisoned. I became his puppet. She set the cup down. Hands clasped so tight her knuckles blanched. Liam, you were right. I've been lying to myself. Told myself I was avenging Ethan. But really, I was making excuses for my own cowardice. She met my gaze. Something like bleak acceptance in her eyes. Tomorrow. Whatever happens. I'll accept it. I'll repay what I owe Ethan. What I owe Mom. What I owe myself. Silence settled. I rose. Walked to her. Took her hands in mine. They were cold. But steady. No longer trembling. Victoria. Listen to me. You're not alone in this. Tomorrow. I'm with you. Victoria looked up. A faint smile touching her lips. Then she whispered. Thank you, Liam. The room was quiet. City lights winking beyond the glass. Something occurred to me. I released her hands. Withdrew the business card Richard had given me. Just a phone number. I set it on the coffee table. Slid it toward Victoria. Your father tried to buy me off this afternoon. Victoria stared at the card for a beat. Then picked it up. Snapped it in half. Dropped it in the trash. He couldn't buy you, she said, looking at me with quiet certainty. Because he misjudged you. You're not that kind of man. I watched her. A strange feeling welling in my chest. Not affection. Not pity. But something more complex. Like two people walking a dark road in a storm. Realizing the other carried a lantern too. 8 a.m. the next morning. The three of us arrived at Frost Group. The press hall was packed. Cameras lining the perimeter. Richard wasn't there yet. Only his name placard and a bouquet on the stage. Victoria stood by the side entrance. Drew a deep breath. Today she wore a white pantsuit. Hair loose rather than pinned up. Softer than usual. But her eyes were sharper than ever. She turned to Emily and me. Ready? Emily nodded. Clutching the USB drive. I nodded. Then the entrance stirred. Richard had arrived. He leaned on his ebony cane. Assistants flanking him as he entered. That benign smile on his face. Nodding to acquaintances. Camera flashes popped incessantly. Richard ascended the stage. Took his seat. Tapped the microphone. Voice warm. Avuncular. Thank you all for attending today's press conference. I'm pleased to announce a new initiative. A personal donation of 1 billion yuan to establish a charitable foundation. Before he could finish, the hall doors burst open. Victoria strode in. Emily behind her. Me trailing. Every lens swiveled toward the entrance. Richard's smile froze. He looked at his daughter. Surprise flickering before he smoothed it over. He rose. Smiled at the microphone. Victoria. What a pleasant surprise. Victoria ignored him. She walked to the stage. Took the spare microphone. Turned to face the crowd. Voice clear and unwavering. Apologies for interrupting today's proceedings. But I have more pressing matters to disclose. She held up the USB drive. High enough for all to see. This drive contains evidence of Mr. Richard Frost's criminal activities over the past 2 decades. Money laundering. Bribery. Accounting fraud. And the premeditated murder of a young man named Ethan Blake. 6 years ago. The room erupted. Flashes blinded. Richard's face darkened. He surged to his feet. Cane thudding against the stage. His voice lost its warmth. Turning shrill. Preposterous. Security. Remove her. Guards charged forward. But were blocked by the crush of journalists. Victoria paid them no mind. She turned. Pointed to Emily. This is Emily Blake. Ethan's sister. She witnessed Richard Frost's crime 6 years ago. Emily stepped forward. Took the microphone. Her hands shook. Voice trembled. But every word was distinct. I'm Emily Blake. My brother was Ethan Blake. 6 years ago. I watched Richard Frost push my brother from the 21st floor. I hid for 6 years. Too afraid to speak. But not today. She pulled out her phone. Displayed a photo. Of the rooftop security camera. Still intact. Footage preserved. I've already submitted the recording to the police. Richard's face went ashen. He stumbled back. Knocking into his chair. He glanced at his assistant. Whose face mirrored his panic. Then the doors opened again. Police entered. The lead officer approached Richard. Presented an arrest warrant. Mr. Frost. You are under investigation for suspected intentional homicide and multiple economic crimes. Please come with us. Richard stood rooted. Expression shifting from shock to fury to hollow defeat. He turned to Victoria. Father and daughter stared at each other across a few feet of space. Richard opened his mouth. But Victoria spoke first. Voice soft but each word landing like a hammer. Father, this is the last time I'll call you that. From today, I am no longer your daughter. I am Victoria Frost. Myself. Richard was led away. Chaos erupted. Cameras clicking non-stop. Emily and I stood as Victoria remained on stage. Microphone still in hand. Fingers trembling slightly. She turned to us. A small smile touching her lips. Then spoke into the microphone. Final words hanging in the air. Ethan Blake. Do you hear me? I did it. Journalists swarmed the stage for the rest of the morning. Victoria stood her ground. Presenting evidence after evidence. Voice steady throughout. Only when she said Ethan's name did she pause. As if swallowing something thick. 2 p.m. Mason called. Richard was formally arrested. Case entering judicial process. Evelyn phoned from the sanatorium. Cried for a long while. Repeating apologies. Victoria listened. Expression calm. After hanging up, she walked to the window. Back to me. Sunlight streamed in. Stretching her shadow long. Liam. Was I right to do this? Her voice was small. Uncertain. I joined her. Stood shoulder to shoulder. You were right. You did something incredibly brave. Victoria turned to me. Eyes red but dry. She gave a short, fleeting smile. Brave? I hid for 6 years before speaking up. Hardly brave. Self-deprecation laced her tone. I shook my head. Real courage isn't absence of fear. It's acting despite it. You did that. Victoria fell silent for a long moment. Then she turned. Leaned against the windowsill. Looking out at the office furnishings. 3 years I've sat in this office. Every piece of furniture. Every ornament. Chosen by Richard. She walked to the desk. Picked up the crystal paperweight Head gifted her. Studied it for a long moment. Then let it drop. It shattered on the floor. From today, everything here starts anew. Her voice was soft, but absolute. In the following days, Frost Group weathered a storm. News of Richard's arrest dominated financial headlines. Stock prices plummeted for 3 consecutive days. An emergency board meeting unanimously elected Victoria as CEO. She sat at the head of the table. Appointment letter before her. Every eye on her. Waiting for her signature. She picked up the pen. Wrote her name in firm strokes. Then she looked up at the board. Frost Group belongs to the Frost family. But no longer to Richard Frost. It belongs to Victoria Frost. Applause erupted. Directors rose. Offering congratulations. She sat composed. Gaze sharp. But I knew the exhaustion beneath the calm. After the meeting, I walked out with her. The corridor was empty. She stopped abruptly. Turned to me. Liam. There's something I need to tell you. She paused. Choosing words carefully. I told you once I chose you because you resemble Ethan Blake. At first. That was true. But later. No. She drew a breath. Voice softening. Later. I realized you're not him. You're more stubborn. More ruthless. More daring. You made me feel I wasn't alone. Made me feel I could be like you. She stepped back. Putting distance between us. Slipping back into her customary cool demeanor. So, thank you. Wherever you go next. I won't forget this debt. She said it like a professional closing a partnership. But her eyes betrayed her. Something in them she couldn't hide. I looked at her. Then said something even I hadn't expected. Victoria. I'm not going anywhere. She blinked. Eyes narrowing slightly. What do you mean? Exactly that. I'm staying at Frost Group. Not going anywhere. A crack appeared in her icy facade. Then she smoothed it over. That familiar frosty expression returning. You're certain? I'm certain. She stepped closer. Extended a finger. Tapped my chest. Just like that night at the villa. Liam Reed. Remember this. Frost Group doesn't keep idle hands. If you stay, you earn your keep. I won't give you special treatment just because you helped me. I caught her finger in my hand. It was cold. But she didn't pull away. Understood. Ms. Frost. I've never needed special treatment. Days passed. Frost Group stabilized gradually. Richard's trial continued. Lawyers estimated at least 6 months. Mason acted as Emily's counsel, handling legal proceedings. Emily decided to stay in China permanently. Said she'd wait until the verdict, then open a small design studio. Do what Ethan had always wanted. Evelyn moved out of the sanatorium into Victoria's villa. For the first time in 16 years, mother and daughter shared a dinner table. Evelyn cried through the entire meal. Victoria said nothing, only kept piling food onto her mother's plate. Everything seemed to be healing, but I knew some threads remained untied. One Friday, I worked late. The entire building was deserted when I stepped out of my office. Elevator doors opened. Victoria stood inside. She wore a light gray trench coat, hair loose, carrying 2 bags. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me. Working late? Just finished next quarter's budget proposal. She stepped into the elevator, stood beside me. The car descended slowly, floor numbers ticking down. She spoke, voice casual, as if mentioning something trivial. My mother asked about you today. Oh, what about? Asked if you're single. I blinked, turned to her. Victoria stared straight ahead, expression unchanged, but the tips of her ears reddened. How'd you answer? Another beat of silence. Then she turned, met my gaze. Elevator light glinted off her eyes, turning them to chips of ice. I said, "He's." The elevator dinged, doors opening to the underground garage. Victoria stepped out first, high heels clicking on concrete. She walked to her car, popped the trunk, placed the bags inside. I stood by the elevator, watching her. She closed the trunk, turned, leaned against the car, arms crossed. Liam, first home-cooked meal since Mom moved in. She made enough for you. She nodded at the trunk, then slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, lowered the window. Stop dawdling. Get in. I hesitated, then opened the passenger door. The car smelled of her crisp scent, familiar, yet new. Victoria drove into the night. She spoke, tone flat, like reporting work. Any plans this weekend? Nothing. Overtime. Cancel it. She glanced at me, voice brooking no argument. Come with me somewhere this weekend. Where? She didn't answer, only accelerated. Streetlights streaked past, the city bleeding by outside. Silence settled, broken only by the AC's hum. Then I remembered. Today was Ethan Blake's death anniversary. The drive took nearly 2 hours on the highway. Victoria said nothing, focused on the road. City lights gave way to farmland, occasional villages flashing by. 2 a.m. We turned into a southern suburb, Ethan Blake's hometown. She said softly. She parked at the mouth of a narrow lane, too tight for the car. We got out. She retrieved the bags from the trunk. Inside, incense, joss paper, a bunch of white chrysanthemums. Moonlight silvered the flagstones, cold and clear. Victoria led the way, heels clicking on stone. Deep in the lane, an old 2-story house, a dim bulb glowing by the door. A white-haired old woman sat in a bamboo chair, rose slowly when she saw Victoria. Her eyes were failing. She squinted for a long moment before recognizing her. Victoria. The old woman's voice was thick with tears. Victoria stepped forward, placed the chrysanthemums on the doorstep, bent at the waist in a deep bow. Auntie, I'm sorry, I'm late. The woman was Ethan's mother. She reached out, trembling, to grip Victoria's shoulder, lift her upright. Clouded eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was steady. Not late. Never late. Emily told me. You cleared Ethan's name. She turned, pushed open the wooden door, led us into the courtyard. Small yard, an altar table in the center bearing Ethan's photograph. He looked startlingly like me. Same brows, same jawline, same tilt to his smile. But I knew we weren't the same person. Victoria stood before the altar, staring at the photo for a long time. Moonlight washed her face. Her fingers trembled around the bag handles. She lit the incense, stuck it in the burner, smoke curling upward, dissipating in the moonlight. She stepped back, faced the photo, began to speak, voice soft, like chatting with an old friend. Ethan, I'm here. You waited 6 years for me. Bet you're angry I took so long. Wind stirred the courtyard, flame wavering. She went on, a hint of a smile in her tone. You always said I had a temper. Sulked too easily. These past 6 years, I've perfected yours. People at the office call me the Ice Queen. No one dares get close. You'd laugh at me if you were here. She paused, voice dropping. Ethan, the man who hurt you is behind bars. Your sister's back. Says she's opening a design studio. Do what you always wanted. Your mom's alright, though her eyes are failing. I've arranged for her to see specialists in the provincial capital next week. You don't need to worry. Everything's taken care of. She drew a shaky breath, voice breaking. Ethan, I'm sorry. If I'd been brave back then, told the truth, you wouldn't have died for nothing all these years. I owe you a debt I can never repay. She stepped back, bowed deeply. Moonlight stretched her shadow long. I stood behind her, that same heavy feeling in my chest. Ethan's mother shuffled over, patted Victoria's back gently. Child, enough. Ethan's watching from above. He doesn't blame you. Victoria straightened, eyes red-rimmed but dry. She turned to me. Liam, come here. I stepped forward. She gestured to the photo. Ethan, meet someone. This is Liam Reed. My partner. She paused noticeably at the word partner. Ethan's mother looked at me for a long moment. No surprise, only quiet understanding. She smiled, voice gentle. The resemblance is striking. But you're you. He's him. Victoria. It's time to let go. Victoria said nothing, only looked down at her hands. That night, we stayed at the Zhou family home. Dawn broke gray and soft. Victoria went alone to the hillside behind the house. I followed at a distance. Halfway up, a lone grave. A young osmanthus tree planted at its head. Leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Victoria crouched, plucked weeds one by one from around the headstone. Meticulous. She said nothing, just weeded. When she finished, she withdrew a yellowed envelope from her pocket, placed it before the grave. To Ethan. Written in her neat script. The letter shed never mailed 6 years ago. She crouched there, staring at it for a long time. Then she rose, dusted dirt from her hands, turned downhill, passing me. She paused, voice so soft it nearly dissolved in the wind. Liam, let's go home. That night, Victoria invited me to Clear River Villa. Evelyn was asleep. The house was quiet save for a single floor lamp. Victoria sat on the sofa, a glass of red wine nearly drained in her hand. She patted the cushion beside her. I sat. She looked at me, weariness in her eyes. Liam, I want to clarify something today. Go ahead. She set down the glass, hands folded primly in her lap, but her fingers twisted together. At first, I sought you out because you resembled him. I wanted to use you, your face, your skills, to help me exact revenge. I even considered, if the plan failed, letting you take the fall. Her voice was soft, but brutally honest. But later, I found I couldn't. She turned to me, something unreadable in her eyes. You helped me chase the truth, helped me gather evidence, held me up when I was breaking. You knew I was using you, and you stayed anyway. Liam, why did you do that? I looked at her, silent for a beat. Because I thought you were worth it. Worth what? Worth helping, worth trusting, worth caring about. Victoria froze. The icy shell around her eyes shattered completely. She lowered her head, swiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, then rose, walked to the liquor cabinet. Enough with the sentimentality. Back to business. She resumed the Ice Queen persona, but I'd seen the swipe of her hand. I withdrew my tablet, opened a file, handed it to her. West District land bid. 3 firms competing. One's backed by Richard's old loyalists. They're trying to drag Frost Group under via the bid. Victoria took the tablet, scrolled through, gaze hardening. You've researched them thoroughly. She looked up, handed the tablet back, a sharp glint in her eyes. Liam, you're right. Nothing in this world comes free. They want to play? Ill play. She rose, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looked out at the city lights, a predatory smile touching her lips. Let them bring it on. The West District bid was scheduled for a month out. In the intervening weeks, Victoria and the marketing team dug into the 3 firms, backgrounds, capital flows, networks, leaving no stone unturned. The night before the bid, I worked until 2 a.m., finalized the analysis report, emailed it to Victoria. 5 minutes later, My phone lit up with her message. Still up? Just finished the report. Heading home now. Come downstairs. I'm outside your office. I blinked. Walked to the window. Her black coupe idled under a streetlight. Taillights glowing like rubies in the dark. I gathered my things. Headed down. She leaned against the car door. 2 coffee cups in hand. Offered one. Hot. Fresh. I took it. Warmth seeping through the cardboard. Out this late? Couldn't sleep. She slid into the driver's seat. I got in the passenger side. The car smelled of coffee and her crisp scent. She leaned back. Stared at the steering wheel. Fingers tapping idly. Not starting the engine immediately. After a beat. She spoke. Voice soft. Liam. What if we lose the bid tomorrow? I sipped the coffee. Turned to her. Lamplight outlined her profile. Lashes casting shadows on her cheekbones. Then we lose. It's just one plot of land. Frost Group can afford it. She turned. Surprise flickering before her expression smoothed. I expected you to say something more professional. Risk assessment. Contingency plans. I smiled. Set the cup in the holder. Stretched out my legs. You know all that better than I do. What you're actually worried about isn't the bid itself. Her fingers stilled on the wheel. She drew a slow breath. You're right. I'm not worried about the bid. I'm thinking, if my father were still here, had never let me face this alone. Mentioning Richard now carried no hatred, only a faint, distant melancholy, like referencing a long-past story. He wasn't a good man, but he taught me plenty. How to negotiate, how to strategize, how to corner an opponent. She lowered her voice, almost speaking to herself. Tomorrow, I'm defeating everything he taught me. Steam curled from the coffee cup, fogging the windshield slightly. I looked at her. Chose my words. Victoria. Listen. Your father taught you many things. But one thing you learned on your own. She turned to me. Waiting. How he treated others. That's legacy. How you choose to treat others. That's your own merit. You're stronger than him. Not because you're smarter, but because you're kinder. She froze, eyes widening slightly before the light dimmed. Then she laughed. Short. Self-deprecating. Kinder? People at the office call me the Ice Queen. The Iron Lady. A heartless machine. She shook her head. Tapped the wheel. They don't know you. Her laughter faded. She looked at me. Gaze intense. Silence stretched. Broken only by the AC's hum. Then she spoke. Voice soft but clear. What about you? Do you know me? I held her gaze. Didn't answer. But my eyes must have spoken for me. She leaned over suddenly. Brushed a kiss against my cheek. Quick. Like a dragonfly skimming water. Then she jerked back. Started the engine. Stared straight ahead. Voice resuming its usual chill. Enough. Taking you home. Early start tomorrow. Her ear tips were pink again. I leaned back. Touched the spot shed kissed. A smile tugging at my lips. All right. The next day's bid was held at the Municipal Tender Hall. 3 firms' contingents arrayed. Seated behind placards. Frost Group's seats were center stage. Largest. Most prominent. Victoria sat beside me. In a navy blue pantsuit. Hair pinned up. Makeup flawless. Expression glacial. She flipped through the bid documents. Movements unhurried. Pages whispering. I leaned close. Pitched my voice low. Nervous? She glanced at me. A haughty smile touching her lips. Nervous? They're not worthy. Bidding opened. First firm bid $13 billion. Second raised to $14.5 billion. When it was Frost Group's turn, Victoria rose. Walked to the podium. Voice clear and cool. Frost Group bids $15 billion. Murmurs rippled through the hall. This exceeded market expectations. The other 2 firms' representatives paled. Then the doors burst open. A middle-aged man in a gray suit entered. Document in hand. Walked straight to the podium. He spoke into the microphone. Voice moderate but silencing the room. I recommend Frost Group's bid be rejected. Every eye turned to him. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Assessing the interloper. On what grounds? The man withdrew a stack of papers. Held them up. Evidence of Frost Group's commercial bribery over the past 3 months. On behalf of relevant departments, I propose suspending Frost Group's bidding eligibility. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. The other two firms' reps exchanged smug smiles. Victoria didn't move. She looked at the man, gaze like a blade dipped in ice. Then she smiled. Faint, but chillingly composed. She glanced at me, gave a slight nod. I rose, withdrew a document from my briefcase, set it on the podium. Sir, is this the evidence you're referring to? The man glanced at my document, his smile freezing. I turned to the assembled journalists, raised my voice so all could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence this gentleman presents is fabricated. The actual evidence, submitted this morning by Frost Group to the relevant authorities. I withdrew another document, held it high. This is the receipt for our whistleblower submission. We are reporting the three bidding firms' backers and their collusion with certain officials. The man's face went ashen. He stumbled back, knocking into the podium, papers scattering. Victoria stepped to the microphone, voice steady, each word weighted. Ladies and gentlemen, during my father's tenure, certain unsavory acts occurred, but those ended with his incarceration. She paused, gaze sweeping the room, then delivered the final line, clear and ringing. From today, Frost Group operates with clean hands. Silence for a beat, then thunderous applause. The rival firm's reps paled, slunk from the hall. The gray-suited man was escorted out by security, head bowed, steps unsteady. Victoria turned to me, a smile touching her lips, one only I could see. Fleeting, but unmistakable. It wasn't triumph of revenge. It was the relief of a burden finally lifted. 3 months later, Richard's trial concluded. Multiple charges. Sentenced to 20 years. Lifetime deprivation of political rights. I accompanied Victoria to court that day. When she emerged, she stood on the steps, tilted her face to the sun. Expression calm. Evelyn waited by the entrance in her wheelchair, attended by a nurse. She reached for her daughter. Victoria knelt, buried her face in her mother's lap. Evelyn stroked her hair, silent tears falling. Victoria, it's over. All over. Victoria looked up, eyes red but smiling. Mom, it's not over. It's just beginning. That evening, Victoria hosted a family dinner at the villa. 4 attendees: Evelyn, Emily, Victoria, and me. Evelyn cooked personally. A table laden with dishes. Simple, but every bite flavorful. Emily drank a little, cheeks pink. She raised her glass to Victoria. Sister Victoria, to you. Thank you for clearing Ethan's name. Victoria clinked glasses, drained hers. Emily, what are your plans now? Emily set down her glass. Shy. I want to open a design studio. Interior design. Ethan always loved that. I want to finish what he started. I interjected. Tone firm. I'll fund it. Consider me a partner. Emily blinked, tears welling again. She nodded vigorously, voice choked. Thank you, both of you. Evelyn placed a piece of braised pork in my bowl, then another in Victoria's. She looked at us, something warm in her gaze, the gentle scrutiny of someone who'd survived much. She spoke, voice soft but earnest. Liam, Victoria, one thing I'd like to ask you. She paused, looking between us. When exactly are you two getting together? My chopsticks nearly hit the floor. Victoria's hand froze mid-motion, ear tips instantly crimson. She set down her glass, voice resuming its usual chill. Mother, don't be ridiculous. We're just business partners. Evelyn smiled, didn't press, only gave me a meaningful look before returning to her meal. That look said clearly, I see through you. After dinner, Victoria walked me to the door. Night air was cool, stirring the osmanthus trees in the courtyard. Scents sweet on the breeze. I stood on the steps, turned to her. She stood in the doorway, lamplight haloing her silhouette in gold. Liam, next week's company anniversary. Prepare accordingly. Back to business. Prepare what? Speech. Annual summary. And. She paused, turned her head slightly, voice dropping so low it nearly vanished into the wind. And you. I blinked. She stood there, ear tips scarlet, face still icy. I couldn't help but smile. This was Victoria's confession. Never yielding, never bowing. But in that crucial moment, in that and you, laying her heart bare. I descended the steps, paused, turned back. Victoria, you asked me once if I understood you. She stood in the doorway, tilted her face up, waiting. I can answer that now. I understand you. All your coldness, all your hardness, all your calculation, all your defenses. Those are your shell, protecting yourself. But beneath that shell, you're softer than anyone, more terrified of loss, more desperate to be loved than anyone. Victoria froze, eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with the quiet of being truly seen. She stepped down, walked to me, wrapped her arms around my waist, buried her face against my chest. Like that night at the villa. Her voice was muffled, trembling faintly. Liam, you win. I held her tighter, chin resting atop her head, voice soft but sure. No, we win. Moonlight washed the courtyard, osmanthus shadows dancing on the ground. Distant city lights winked like scattered stars. In my arms, Victoria Frost was no longer the aloof Ice Queen CEO. She was simply a woman named Victoria Frost, finally learning to love, finally allowed to be loved. And I, Liam Reed, was no longer the brash junior who'd muttered in the break room that Victoria Frost deserved to die alone. I was the man who dared to marry her. The man had earned her trust enough to let her shed every mask. Night air was cool. The woman in my arms was warm. Moonlight paved the long road home.